Welcome to this section on periodization. The magnitude of improvements in fitness qualities such as cardiovascular endurance, muscle endurance, strength, flexibility, and body composition are primarily influenced by the structure of a training program. A training program is a smaller block or phase of training that focuses on developing a fewer number of fitness qualities. It is critical for coaches to have a systematic, goal-oriented approach to training. These goals, whether it's hypertrophy development, strength gains, or body composition reduction, should be easily identifiable to the people you work with. One of the most effective ways to ensure that the programs we provide to the people we work with achieve the desired goal is to have them laid out in a periodization plan. A periodization plan allows you, as the coach, to design a full training cycle, normally lasting 12 months, that focuses on sequential training programs that elicit very specific physiological adaptations, such as hypertrophy, strength, or aerobic endurance. A periodized training plan can be implemented in a variety of ways. The linear or classical periodization model is a popular periodization model characterized by gradual increases in training intensity and a decrease in training volume. Over the duration of this presentation, we're going to look at what periodization is. We're going to look at what the different cycles of periodization look like. We're going to look at the hierarchy of strength and fitness qualities. And then finally, we're going to look at some variables that we need to apply into a periodization plan. So what is periodization? Periodization is simply the long-term approach to structured training. It entails the progressive cycling of variables such as training volume, which can be quantified as reps by sets, and training intensity, which can be quantified as load lifted. With regards to periodization cycles, there are 5 main considerations that we need to look at when considering the different cycles that we can apply into a periodization plan. Starting with the smallest is the workout itself, and this is normally quantified as the structural units of training per hour or minute that take place every day. Next, we have the microcycle, and this refers to training that takes place over a 7-day period or a week of training. Then we have the mesocycle. This is normally referred to as the phase of training, and this can last anywhere from 3 to 12 weeks. Then we have the macrocycle. This normally lasts from 9 to 12 months or a year, depending on who you're working with. And this is made up of many different blocks of training. And then lastly, we have the quadrennial cycle. And this is not necessarily important to the general population. However, it is important to know that a quadrennial cycle exists, which is the planning and preparation of training over a 4-year period, and it is designed to get Olympic athletes from one Olympic Games to the next Olympic Games, and Olympic Games are 4 years apart. So let's look at what a periodization cycle looks like laid out over a yearly plan. So as we talked about, our yearly plan or our macro cycle represents the 12 months of training that takes place. Within that 12 months, it's broken into smaller blocks of training, and they are referred to as mesocycles. So in this case, we have 4 blocks laid out: block 1, block 2, block 3, and block 4. Within each block, we'll have smaller, what's called phases of training. So you could have anywhere from 1 phase up as far as 3 phases of training, depending on the training age of the individual that you're working with. So if the individual has a low training age, you might only have 1 phase lasting 12 weeks. Or if the individual has a high training age, you need to change their program regularly. So they might have up as far as 3 different training phases within the mesocycle or the block of training. So as you can see, for this example, we've laid out block 1 is focusing on movement preparation. So the biomechanical aspect of your squat, your hip hinge, your upper body push and pull, all your functional movements. The first block is focusing on improving them. The second block of training is focusing on strength endurance. So this is where we focus on higher repetitions. We add a little bit of load to the movement developed in block 1. When it comes to block 3, the focus is on hypertrophy, and this is where we start to utilize reps of 12 down as far as 6 to develop hypertrophy. And then finally, in our last phase, again lasting 10 to 12 weeks, the focus is on strength. And this is where we start to use reps from 1 to 6, depending on what the goal is. Within each phase of training, there will be smaller weeks of training that take place, also referred to as the microcycle. And when we get to the programming section of this lecture, we'll flesh out what happens on a day-to-day and a week-to-week basis inside our programs. So next, let's look at the hierarchy of strength qualities. So this is something that we must adhere to as coaches and trainers. And when we think of improving the people that we work with, we should think about it in the context of a triangle. That the top of the triangle represents the performance of the individual. So this is where the individual wants to get to. And everyone that we work with wants to improve their strength and fitness qualities. And in order to improve their qualities or grow the triangle bigger and taller, we must first concentrate on the base of the triangle. When we think about strength qualities, the bottom of our pyramid, or the base and the foundation to improving our strength qualities, must be a focus on the biomechanics of the movements, the functional movements that we have highlighted. So that's our hip hinge, our squat, our deadlift, and our upper body push and pull. Once we have those biomechanics nailed in terms of movement, then we can move on to the second layer of the pyramid, which is our strength endurance work. And this is where we can focus on reps of 12 to 15 plus reps. So we take the movement that's been developed at the bottom of the triangle or in block 1, and we start to add a little bit of load to what we're doing in block 2 or the second layer of the triangle. Once we have improved movement with a little bit of load, so we've improved our strength endurance, we can then move on and start to develop hypertrophy. And this is where we can utilize rep ranges of 6 to 12, and we can really start to focus on developing some good quality hypertrophy. The final stage of improving an individual from a strength quality perspective is improving their strength. And this is where we can start to utilize rep ranges of 1 to 6. It's really important to understand that we cannot jump any of these steps, and they must be sequentially followed. So if we jump from movement preparation straight up to strength, yes, you may get a very acute improvement or response, but an early to ripen, early to rotten scenario will play out eventually, where you will get a breakdown in movement and you'll inevitably end up injuring the person. When you follow this step in terms of developing movement, then developing strength endurance, then developing hypertrophy, then focusing on strength, you will develop and build a robust, durable individual. Next, let's look at the hierarchy of fitness qualities. So the same principle applies in terms of if we want to improve this person's fitness, okay, the top of the triangle represents that. So what we must focus on in terms of improving their fitness qualities is we must focus on the bottom of the triangle. And again, that comes down to the biomechanics, the mechanical aspects needed to improve their fitness. So if that individual wants to run or cycle or swim, it's up to you as the coach to make sure that they are biomechanically efficient and sound at those movements before we start to prescribe them any type of real conditioning work. Once we have improved the biomechanical aspect of their movement around cycling, running, swimming, skipping, jogging, walking, it doesn't matter. Then we can focus on applying aerobic work into their program. And aerobic work can be quantified as work that takes place that is greater than 90 seconds in duration. Once we've developed aerobic capacity or developed the aerobic energy system, then we can move on to anaerobic work. And anaerobic work is work performed at a much higher intensity and lasts anywhere from 10 up as far as 90 seconds in really well trained individuals. And once we have developed our anaerobic energy system, then we can go on and develop what's called our ATP or our adenosine triphosphate system, where this is where we perform explosive work and strength work. And this energy system lasts for anywhere from 2 to 10 seconds. So again, really important that we don't skip any of these steps in prescribing exercises and the intensity at which exercises are performed. It's important that we make sure the biomechanics in terms of cycling, swimming, jogging are sound. Once they're sound, it's about applying work that is greater than 90 seconds, so 90 seconds and above, so improving their aerobic capacity to perform exercises such as jogging, cycling, running. Once we have improved their aerobic energy system, then we can increase the intensity at which they perform those exercises. So we can do 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, 40 seconds on, 40 seconds off, and improve their anaerobic energy system. And we can perform certain movements at a higher intensity for a shorter period of time. And once we have a well-developed anaerobic energy system, we can then move on and develop what's called our adenosine triphosphate, or the system that we use for strength or explosive type movements. We also need to consider different variables when we are looking at periodization. So like we had mentioned at the start of this presentation, two variables are volume and intensity. So volume normally comes as a result of hypertrophy work, and it can be quantified as sets by reps. And intensity is normally comes from strength work. So this has got to do with the amount of load or weight that we lift. One thing to understand and consider as we're planning programs and periodization plans and models is that volume and intensity cannot coexist together. So as we develop strength endurance and then hypertrophy, and finally as we move towards strength, the volume, which is the amount of reps that we're performing, needs to start decreasing, and the intensity at which we lift that weight, so the total load that we lift per rep, needs to start increasing. So they have what's called an inverse relationship. So as intensity decreases, as volume decreases, the intensity can increase, and they cannot coexist together. You cannot focus on hypertrophy and strength within the same exercise. Within the same exercise, you will struggle to do that. So it's an important consideration when looking at planning programs and periodization plans for individuals. And then finally, we need to consider the specificity of training. So that is choosing an exercise that can elicit the desired adaptation that we need. So if we are to choose a goblet squat to improve strength or maximum strength, that's probably not the best choice of exercise, simply because the individual would struggle to lift enough load, or the intensity at which they could lift perhaps would not be enough for them to develop strength or maximum strength qualities. So specificity is an important consideration. Next, we have overload. So this is choosing an exercise from which you can apply a stimulus to the body in the form of intensity or volume. So again, making sure our exercise selection is correct so that we can either develop hypertrophy or we can develop strength. And then finally, variation. So this is making sure that there's a change in exercise, rep, or set to avoid the law of accommodation. So one thing that we want to avoid is giving the clients that we work with, prescribing them 5 sets of 5 repetitions on the bench and the squat for the duration of the time that they work with you for the next 6 or 12 months, because we know over the first 4 to 8 weeks, perhaps that would work very well with them. But if there's not enough variation in the training, the law of accommodation will set in and they will stop adapting to training. When it comes to adaptation, so we've talked about adaptation a couple of times throughout this presentation. So what is adaptation? Well, this refers to the process of the body adapting to a progressive exercise program. And when you apply those 3 variables, specificity, overload, and variation, to a training program, you will achieve that. The body gets broken down and fatigued as a result of new stresses and demands placed upon it during an exercise program. And when proper recovery is followed through correct periodization, the body recovers from the stimulus and then compensates for the stress that has been placed upon it, leading to improved fitness and strength qualities. So if we look at the graph beside us, this is the SRA curve, the stimulus recovery adaptation curve. So this refers to a session taking place, applying a stimulus to an individual in whatever exercise, bench or squat. Once that stimulus has been applied, there will be a dip in performance and a recovery phase will take place where you have to apply techniques like nutrition, rest, hydration, and sleep. Once you apply these techniques and you take a great enough period of time to recover, you will super compensate and your new baseline now will be higher than it previously was before you performed that exercise. So that's what we refer to with the SRA curve, the stimulus recovery adaptation curve. And if this process takes place time and time again, every week, every month, over a year-long period, you will get drastic improvements in strength and fitness qualities with the people that you work with. We have a 12-month periodization plan laid out before you, and we are going to be focusing on block 3, exactly what happens in block 3. Block 3 is right here. So the aims over phase 1, okay, so remember we talked about the different phases that exist within each block. Well, in this block there are 1, 2, 3 phases. So phase 1 of block 3, we are focusing on hypertrophy. That's reps of 10 to 12. So over this 4-week period, we will be decreasing the reps from 12 to 11 to 10 to 10. Okay, so we'll have a decrease in training volume over this period of time. In our main compound lifts, our barbell squat, bench, and RDL. And again, the energy system that we'll be developing here is aerobic. In phase 2, okay, which is the next phase, again, our reps that we'll be focusing on are 8 to 10. So we'll probably be going 10, 9, 8, and 8, okay? And again, in all our compound lifts, barbell squat, bench press, and RDL, aerobic energy system will be the main energy system that's being developed here, because if you think about it, in these exercises with 8 to 10 reps performed with a tempo of kind of 4 seconds on the way down with a second pause, you're talking about a 40 to 60 second set of work there. So that is our aerobic energy system being developed. And then finally in phase 3, okay, which is this phase here in September, we're focusing on reps of 6 to 8, again in all our compound lifts. Okay, so that is kind of 8, that is 8, 7, 6, 6. And that brings us our hypertrophy phase from 12 reps right down as far as 6 reps over this block of training. And we've included phase 1, phase 2, phase 3.